Some Americans will hand over money for anything. Traffic cams, HOA fines, even fees that sound like they were invented by a bored raccoon with a clipboard. And if you think that's the peak of financial stupidity, trust me, we haven't even stepped into the deep end yet. 1. A man in Arizona got fined because his lawn was too green, which, according to the city inspector, indicated suspicious overwatering. Yes, the man was punished for the crime of hydration. I love that we now live in a world where grass has to maintain the emotional stability of a bored cactus to avoid fines. The guy tried explaining he'd installed a new sprinkler system, but the city reacted like he was running a black market water empire out of his flower beds. They hit him with a fine large enough to make him consider ripping out the grass entirely and replacing it with gravel, aka the official state plant of Arizona. Now the lawn is dull, dry, and mildly depressed, which apparently is exactly what the city wanted. Congrats everyone, victory for ugly grass. 2. I watched a woman at an airport get fined for gate loitering, which is TSA's polite way of saying existing in a chair slightly earlier than we prefer. She showed up 3 hours early, like every terrified flyer in America, and sat near her gate. Suddenly, an agent swooped in like she just tried to smoke on the runway and informed her she was creating congestion. She was literally the only human in the entire gate area. That's not congestion, that's seating. She tried to argue, but TSA offered 2 options: move to a different gate or pay the fine. She paid it because she correctly identified that arguing with TSA is how you end up on a watch list. Airports don't enforce rules, they improvise them. 3. A guy in Florida got fined because his mailbox was too patriotic. Not illegal, not dangerous, just too patriotic. The HOA claimed his American flag-wrapped mailbox disrupted the neighborhood's visual harmony, which is adorable coming from a board that approved 30 beige houses designed exclusively for people who fear color. He paid the fine because battling an HOA is like battling mold. You might win, but it'll cost time, dignity, and possibly your health. They eventually approved the mailbox again on one condition: the colors couldn't be too vibrant. Imagine telling someone their patriotism needs to be toned down a few notches. Incredible. 4. A couple in Ohio got fined because their trash can was visible from the sidewalk, as if pedestrians might collapse from the horror of seeing a plastic bin doing its job. The city apparently wants trash cans treated like Victorian ankles, hidden at all times. The couple placed it beside their garage, logically where trash goes. But logic is rarely welcome in municipal government. The appeal process required diagrams, photos, and an explanation of their long-term trash storage strategy. For a trash can, they paid the fine, shoved the bin behind a tiny shrub, and now the whole setup looks like it's hiding evidence. Mission accomplished. 5. A man in Texas got fined for having illegally enthusiastic Christmas lights. Not too bright, not too loud, just too joyful. His synchronized light display apparently caused traffic distraction, which is legal code for drivers slowed down to look at something pretty. The city accused him of creating decorative nuisance conditions, which I'm pretty sure is what Ebenezer Scrooge wrote in his HOA bylaws. He paid the fine because appealing meant facing a committee of people who believe blinking lights are a threat to democracy. He toned the display down next year. They still complained. 6. A woman in California got fined because her window AC unit lacked aesthetic cohesion, a phrase that tells you everything about California and nothing about air conditioning. The HOA decided the unit was visually disruptive, a strong stance for a neighborhood filled with houses the exact color of oatmeal. They suggested she move the unit to a less visible window, which is interesting because ACs tend to need windows. She paid because the alternative was buying a $7,000 board-approved cooling system. Only in California do people get in legal trouble for trying not to melt. 7. A family in North Carolina was fined because their inflatable pool violated neighborhood water aesthetics, a phrase that should be studied by sociologists. The pool was bright blue, scandalous, apparently. The HOA said it disrupted community tranquility, as though the backyard was previously a spa retreat instead of a patch of grass with a grill. They paid the fine and replaced the pool with a beige one. Yes, a beige pool. Because nothing says summer fun like swimming in something that looks like lukewarm latte foam. 8. A guy in New Jersey got fined for reckless walking, which sounds like a joke but is somehow real. According to the officer, he crossed the street with excessive confidence. Excessive confidence? The man wasn't doing parkour. He walked briskly. The ticket described him as displaying potentially hazardous assertiveness, which feels less like a legal term and more like something a guidance counselor would say before recommending meditation apps. He paid the fine because contesting it required missing work. Walking boldly, no longer legal in New Jersey. 9. A tourist in New Orleans was fined for feeding pigeons unauthorized food because apparently the pigeons have very strict dietary guidelines. She tossed them some French fries, totally normal in a city where these same pigeons eat beads, cigarette butts, and the concept of shame. An officer appeared and lectured her about urban avian health. She paid the fine because the explanation took longer than the meal. Somewhere nearby, a pigeon was eating a gum wrapper in protest. 10. A man in Colorado got fined for having too many garage sale signs, which is how you know someone in city planning woke up that day craving power. He put up 4 signs, 2 over the legal limit. The enforcement officer counted them like he was disarming a bomb. The fine was for excessive directional signage, which is a wonderfully dramatic way to say poster board. The man paid the fine and retired from garage sales forever, proving bureaucracy is the ultimate yard sale killer. 11. A woman in Chicago got fined for running an unlicensed lemonade stand, which is exactly how you discourage future entrepreneurs. Her kids sold 50-cent lemonade on the corner, nothing strange. But a passing city worker decided that childhood beverages must comply with municipal regulations. The fine was more than the kids made the entire day. Chicago, cracking down on dangerous criminal enterprises like lemonade stands since forever. 12. A guy in Oregon was fined for mowing his lawn too early, specifically at 8:59 a.m. instead of 9:00, 1 minute. The city noise ordinance apparently thinks leaf blowers, barking dogs, and garbage trucks are fine at dawn, but a lawnmower at 8:59 is a societal threat. A neighbor submitted video evidence like she was prosecuting war crimes. He paid the fine because arguing over 60 seconds of lawnmower noise is how people lose their will to live. 13. A man in Nevada was fined for over-decorating his yard for Halloween. His sin? Too many skeletons. Not animatronic, not loud, just skeletons. The city claimed they created an unsafe spectacle, which is hilarious, considering Vegas exists. He paid because appealing the fine would have required showing up in costume, literally, since the hearing fell on Halloween. Next year, he put up 1 skeleton. They still complained. 14. A woman in Pennsylvania was fined for having excessively friendly chickens. Her hens wandered to the property line and greeted a neighbor who apparently fears poultry diplomacy. The city fined her for failure to restrain domesticated fowl, which sounds like the title of a children's book gone wrong. She paid, the chickens went back into confinement, and the neighbor continues living in fear of anything with feathers. 15. A man in Washington was fined for leaving his Christmas tree up past January 15th, which the city described as seasonal light pollution. Not a fire hazard, just emotionally offensive. He forgot to take it down, the city mailed him a notice, and he paid the fine because fighting it felt insane. Meanwhile, the city hasn't fixed a pothole since Obama was president. But yes, let's crack down on lingering festive spirits. 16. A man in Maryland got fined because his backyard hammock was considered an unapproved suspended structure, which is an elegant way of saying the HOA hates relaxation. According to the board, a hammock posed a visual disruption to property cohesion, as though the neighborhood was a curated art exhibit and not 43 houses built from the same 3 blueprints. The man tried explaining that it was just 2 trees and some rope, not a pirate ship mast, but they were unmoved. They even mailed him a printed diagram showing permitted ground-level leisure devices, which included chairs and benches, but specifically banned dangling recreational elements. I wish I were exaggerating. They fined him for hanging, wait for it, an object between 2 trees. He paid it because arguing would have required attending a meeting where 5 adults debated the moral decay caused by swinging motion. The hammock came down, the yard became boring again, and the HOA slept peacefully, knowing gravity had been restored. 17. A woman in Missouri got fined for letting her car warm up in her own driveway because unattended idling was a ticketable offense. She started the engine on a freezing morning, stepped inside for 2 minutes, and returned to find a ticket tucked under her wiper, like a romantic gesture from someone who hates joy. The officer explained she was inviting auto theft, which is a fascinating interpretation of victim blaming. Imagine being robbed and the city saying, "Well, you did make it too convenient." She paid the fine because contesting it required attending a hearing at 7:30 a.m., where presumably everyone idles emotionally while waiting for coffee. The city proudly claimed the policy reduces crime and pollution, which is funny because the officer drove away in a patrol car that probably burned more fuel than her entire warming session. Truly, justice was served, lukewarm like her car would have been. 18. A guy in South Carolina got fined for having curtains that were too patterned, which is what happens when municipal government becomes a fashion critic. He had floral drapes, nothing wild, nothing neon, just standard grandma-core interior decor. But the HOA decided the curtain design clashed with the architectural intent of the neighborhood, which is a bold claim for a community whose architectural intent appears to be beige, but make it slightly sadder. They fined him after a board member noticed the curtains from the sidewalk, meaning someone was out there squinting into windows like a bored crow with authority issues. He paid the fine because trying to argue about textile design with an HOA is like trying to reason with a malfunctioning Roomba. Lots of spinning, no progress. He replaced the curtains with plain white ones, which made his living room look like a rental car interior. The HOA approved instantly. 19. A family in Georgia was fined because their welcome mat was excessively expressive. It said, "Hello, sunshine," which to the HOA apparently read as an act of aggression. Their letter claimed the mat introduced an informal tone inconsistent with the distinguished character of the community. Distinguished? These are houses with vinyl, siding, and mailboxes shaped like lozenges. Nothing here is distinguished, not even the fine. The family tried to appeal, but the board replied that only neutral greeting mats were allowed, ideally featuring nothing except a simple, emotionless welcome. The mat was replaced, the fine was paid, and the community was spared from the dangerous threat of positive vibes. Truly, we were all at risk. 20. A man in Utah got fined for having prolonged snow presence on his sidewalk, which is a poetic way of saying winter happened at an inconvenient time. A storm hit overnight, dumped 6 inches, and the city gave him 2 hours to clear it. 2 hours, as if he had a personal snow-plowing butler parked in the garage. He woke up, grabbed his shovel, and found a ticket taped to his mailbox because the inspector came at 5:45 a.m. The fine claimed he failed to maintain passable pedestrian pathways, even though no pedestrian in their right mind is strolling around suburban Utah during an active snowstorm at dawn. He paid the fine and bought a snowblower, which will absolutely break next winter because snowblowers are just glittery vending machines for disappointment. But at least now he can blast powder at his inspector's shoes. 21. A woman in Virginia got fined for having a front yard too enticing to wildlife, which is the most passive-aggressive way to say deer exist. She planted tulips. That's it, tulips. And apparently, tulips are the Disney World of suburban deer. The city said her garden encouraged animal congregation, which is a fancy bureaucratic euphemism for Bambi ate your landscaping. They warned her that by creating a consistent food source, she was contributing to ecological imbalance, which is a dramatic way of saying deer like snacks. She paid the fine because they threatened additional penalties if wildlife patterns persisted, as though she personally controls the daily schedules of forest animals. She replaced the tulips with native plants the deer hated. The yard looks like a dentist waiting room now, but hey, ecological balance restored. 22. A guy in Massachusetts got fined because his recycling bin lid wasn't fully closed, which is hilarious, considering the city picks up recycling with a truck that sounds like a collapsing metal dinosaur. He put an extra cardboard box on top, the lid sat half an inch open, and that half inch apparently threatened the very foundation of the waste management system. A sanitation worker left him a fine for improper container closure, plus a helpful note recommending he generate less waste. Oh, absolutely. Let me just stop participating in capitalism real quick. He paid the fine, crushed the box down to the density of a neutron star, and now his recycling ritual resembles competitive origami. 23. A man in Illinois got fined for barbecuing in his driveway on a high-smoke day, which I assume is the suburban equivalent of a red alert. He fired up his grill on a Saturday afternoon, cooked 2 burgers, and produced what I describe as barely visible smoke. but apparently the HOA has smoke-detecting laser vision. They fined him for creating airborne culinary disturbances. Culinary disturbances. Someone actually wrote that sentence and felt profound pride. He paid the fine because the appeal form required entering the number of patties cooked, and that level of bureaucracy deserves to win. He now grills in his backyard, hidden behind a privacy fence like he's doing something illegal. 24. A woman in Indiana got fined because her porch wind chimes were deemed psychologically disruptive, which is an impressive accusation for a $12 set of metal tubes. A neighbor complained the sound was too whimsical, and the local ordinance actually supported him. They cited her for producing persistent tonal interference, which sounds like a diagnosis from a robot therapist. She paid the fine because removing the chimes was cheaper than entering a petty war with someone who clearly wakes up every day searching for new sounds to hate. The chimes came down, the porch became silent, and the neighbor probably celebrated by filing a noise complaint against birds. 25. A guy in Kentucky got fined for leaving his Halloween pumpkin on display past the courtesy timeline, which means once November hit, that pumpkin became contraband. He left it out until November 3rd. Not November 23rd, not Christmas, just 3 days past some imaginary line. The HOA cited him for seasonal lag, like the pumpkin was slowing down the rotation of the earth. He paid the fine because it wasn't worth arguing with people who treat gourds like scheduling offenses. Now he composts his pumpkin on November 1st at 12:01 a.m. just to stay safe. 26. A couple in Minnesota got fined for their kids' sidewalk chalk art because the drawings were not professionally executed. Their kids drew suns, stick figures, squiggles, the usual chalk chaos, and the HOA responded like Banksy had committed vandalism on private property. They claimed the artwork created visual clutter, which is interesting because it washes away every time a cloud sneezes. The couple paid the fine because appealing would require submitting photos of the artwork to a review board of adults who probably hate hopscotch. The rain eventually cleaned everything. The HOA took credit. 27. A man in Tennessee got fined for having a garden hose that was too visible, which sounds like something you'd hear in a dystopian novel about lawn fascism. He left a green hose coiled near his spigot. The HOA said it disrupted exterior cohesion and should be stored in an opaque receptacle. An opaque receptacle for a hose. He paid the fine because he couldn't emotionally handle purchasing specialized hose containment equipment. The hose now lives in a box that looks like a casket for gardening tools. 28. A woman in Colorado got fined because her dog barked rhythmically, which the city classified as patterned nuisance noise. The dog barked 3 times at regular intervals while a delivery driver walked by. 3 barks. The officer claimed it created a repetitive auditory cycle, which is an academic way of saying the dog barked like a dog. She paid the fine because disputing it meant proving the dog didn't have intentional cadence. The dog remains blissfully unaware of the controversy, continuing to bark in whatever time signature he pleases. 29. A man in Oregon got fined for leaving his trash bins out too early after pickup, which is somehow worse than leaving them out before. He pulled the bins back to the curb after work, 3 hours after pickup, and apparently this violated the rule stating bins must be retrieved promptly, a word the city defined as within 1 hour. 1 hour. As if people sit at home staring out the window waiting for the trash truck like it's Santa. He paid the fine and now sets an alarm every Tuesday so he can sprint outside the moment the truck leaves. The bins are back in place within minutes, and I'm sure the city sleeps easier knowing punctuality has been restored. And there you have it, proof that American fines are basically performance art. Drop your pick for the dumbest one below, and if you survive this chaos, you know what to do next.